Up next, we have Taylor Winchell. I think that's how you say your last name, sorry. Who works with Denver Water. And Denver Water serves water and promotes efficient use to the 1.4 million people in the Denver metropolitan area. And Taylor is a water resource engineer who focuses on translating climate change threats to on-the-ground adaptation actions. Taylor's work encompasses many areas of water resource planning, including drought planning, water supply and right analysis, as well as long-range integrated resource planning. So with that, I'll let Taylor kick it off. Thanks for being here, Taylor.
Great, thanks, Madison. Let's see. So, is that coming up? Are you able to see my slides? Just want
Yeah, we can see it.
Great, thanks. All right, well, yeah, thanks again for the introduction, Madison. Today, I'm going to talk to you all about Denver Water's approach to climate change adaptation with my talk titled Embracing Uncertainty in a Climate of Change. And I'd like to acknowledge some collaborators on this work. So Usha Sharma, who's the treasurer of Denver Water, and Larna Cates, who founded and runs our climate change adaptation program at Denver Water. So to start with a little bit about Denver Water, we're just over 100 years old. We were founded in 1918. We serve, this number just got updated from 1.4 to 1.5 million people. So Denver is still growing. And that makes up about 25% of the state's population. In doing this, we account for about 2% of the state's water use. We are the third largest landowner in the state of Colorado, and we're governed by a board of water commissioners, which makes our governing structure different from the city and county of Denver. So to dive right into climate change, if you are on this call, I probably don't need to convince you that climate change is real, but I will reiterate it here. So this is the latest global temperature anomaly plot from NOAA. And as you can see, since about the late 1970s there, every single year has been warmer than the long-term global average, and 2019 is plotted on there, and you can see that it is the second hottest year on record globally. And so what does this look like in Colorado? Well, it looks pretty similar. We really see the shift to a consistently warming climate from about the mid-1980s in Colorado. And you can see that 2019 is also plotted on here as the last bar, and it's just above the long-term average. The interesting thing about 2019 is it actually had a really cold and wet spring, but for the late summer and fall, we actually set records as the hottest late summer and fall in observed record in Colorado history. So although it's not the warmest overall year on record, we were still setting records within that year. So Denver Water really started to think about climate change in about 2002 when the state started to experience its historic drought. And our initial approach was really thinking about, how will climate change impact hydrology? And of course, there are many ways which this can come to fruition, but a lot of this was unknown back in those quote unquote early days. So thinking about, how will the snow and snowpack be impacted? How will this translate to runoff? Will droughts and floods become more frequent and intense? How will evapotranspiration of watersheds change? And how will the soil moisture change? Will wildfires become more frequent and intense? How will the vegetation of watersheds change? And how will they be impacted by pests like bark beetles? How will dust on snow change runoff that ends up in our system? And how will water quality ultimately be impacted? And since those early days of 2002, many of the projections of how these things might have changed have now become observations, and they have changed, and we're expecting to continue to see them change. And since those early days, we've adopted our thinking now to really understand that climate change impacts all organizational functions, not just our water supply. So going through this wheel here, and starting with water in the upper left there, we know that climate change impacts water quantity, quality, and operations. But we also know that climate change can impact our infrastructure. So thinking about like how are our buildings and assets impacted by extreme heat, and how do we need to change the materials we use in building future infrastructure, and also the design processes in building future infrastructure. So like if we're building a new pump station, do we need to upgrade the HVAC system of that pump station to make sure it doesn't overheat in future extreme heat scenarios? And then also, how do we protect our watersheds, which we consider living infrastructure? In terms of the people at our organization, so firstly, about 30% of our workforce works outdoors on a basically daily basis. And so, what impacts do those people already experience from extreme heat? And then are they prepared for what is going to be coming with increased heat waves in the future? And how can we protect them against that? In terms of recruitment and retention, there's a lot of the tide is really turning that people entering the workforce these days want to work for an organization that is climate forward thinking organization. And at Denver Water, we are a climate forward thinking organization. So how do we really communicate that message to attract younger workers and also to retain them? And then for our water demand, how will our demand change in a future uncertain climate? Will people use more water, less water? During what times of the year? How will water use change in winter and summer? So these are a lot of unknown questions that we have to think through. And then in terms of business and operations, so we can have supply chain disruptions from extreme weather events. We're all becoming acutely familiar with supply chain disruptions with the current COVID situation. For bond disclosures, so Denver Water as a public agency issues bonds to fund some of our larger projects. And to do that, we have a bond rating that's given to us by rating agencies, and that determines our interest rate of what we have to pay on those bonds. And rating agencies are now actually looking into whether organizations are planning for climate change, and they're using that information in helping to determine that organization's rating at the end of the day. So actually planning for climate change can help your bond rating. And then insurance policies, the insurance industry is really currently trying to figure out what to do about climate change. It's very hard to price in a future where we don't know what that future is going to be and what's going to need to be covered in that. So it's kind of uncertain at the moment, but it's looking like the insurance industry will almost create their own climate change coverage policies, which will be an additional expense. And then how do we set our water rates in a future that's likely to be more uncertain weather-wise? So how will the climate change in Colorado? If you have that answer, please email me at the end of this presentation, because this is a very difficult question to answer, but we do have some ideas. So what we have here are two climate projection plots where you have temperature projections on the left and precipitation projections on the right. And what each one of those squiggly lines are is a different climate model projection output from 37 different climate models. So just starting with the temperature on the left, we can see, almost all models expect things to get much warmer than we are today, but there's a wide range of how that might come to fruition. And so it's a challenge because we can't really say what the temperature will be, but we know it will be warmer. And if you just look out at that around 2050, mid-century, and you look, those dotted lines are the median projections. And if you follow those, you'll see that the median projections show that the average year in mid-century is likely to be warmer than the warmest year we've ever experienced in Colorado. And that's just a potential average year. So we need to be planning for a much hotter future than we're experiencing today. In terms of precipitation, it's really anyone's guess. We're not sure if things will get wetter on average, drier on average. In general, what scientists agree on is that things will become, precipitation will become more variable from year to year. So the question becomes, when we have a warmer and hotter, but we're not sure how much hotter temperature future with a very uncertain precipitation future, how do you plan for that? And at Denver Water, what we've done is we embrace this uncertainty through a process called scenario planning, and we use scenario planning to guide our long-range plan, which is a plan that plans 50 years out for the future of Denver Water. And what we do in this process is we systematically develop a small number of scenarios, in our case 4. And across these scenarios, we consider different situations of how the economy of our service area might have different outcomes in 50 years, what the population might look like, the types of housing people might live in, what the climate might look like. And we've integrated climate change into every single one of these scenarios. So at Denver Water, we are saying that we expect the future to be either warmer or much hotter. We're just not sure which one. And we treat all these futures as equally likely to occur because it's so, 50 years is so far out and it's too uncertain to say this is going to happen, so let's plan for that. And then what we do is we look for common strategies that are no or low regrets that would work across all of these futures. And what this scenario planning process really does is it builds in a mindset in the organization of adaptive capacity. And it always has us thinking about flexible investments in building a diversified portfolio. And that's whether it's a portfolio of water, of infrastructure assets, or of money that we use to fund our organization. And it also encourages us to build scalable options. And a very tangible example from that is our North Water Treatment Plant that we're currently building. That was originally slotted to be built for the capacity of around 240 million gallons per day. And then people got back around the table and said, that might not be actually the capacity we need for this plant. What about we build it to 150 million gallons per day? And they agreed upon that. And then they got back around the table again and said, well, we don't really know what treatment is going to look like 30, 40, 50 years in the future. And if it becomes more decentralized, then we won't need that 150 million gallons per day at that plant. So for now, why don't we build it to a 75 million gallon per day capacity and leave room to expand it to 150 if need be in the future. But if not, we can leave it at 75 and save the money and capacity in building it. And this allows us to preserve options in the future. And then we're always working to continuously plan moving forward. And the useful thing about embedding climate change in our long-range planning process is that our integrated resource plan, our long-range plan, informs the other plans at our organization. So our capital plan and budgeting process, every new project that's proposed for our capital plan has to go through a business case form, and this form has questions about climate change. So how long do you expect this asset to be around? Do you see potential impacts from extreme heat? So it has people thinking about climate change right from the start. Our infrastructure master plan, which we're currently redoing at Denver Water, which details all of our infrastructure assets. We have someone from our long-range planning team working with the teams on every chapter of that plan. And again, this brings a climate lens to each one of those chapters. Our bond disclosures, which I talked about earlier, we work directly with our finance team to work with the rating agencies to tell them, how we're thinking about climate change and how we're actively preparing. And then setting our rates. So one thing Denver Water's done over the last 10 to 12 years is we've really increased our fixed rate structure. And what this allows us to do is have a more steady revenue stream year to year, which allows us to, have a better idea of maintaining the projects we're working on and the staff that we support. Some other projects we're working on at the moment is one project that's specifically planning for future heat stress to our infrastructure assets and our field staff. And what we're doing with this is working directly with our asset management team and our field staff operations managers to first just get them in the room and ask them the questions of have you already experienced to date? And then what might you be expecting to experience in the future? And we're providing them with climate science information of this is what the future might look like. And then mutually coming up with adaptation solutions that we can start implementing now. So for example, like what PPE might we need for our field staff, or would alternate hours help for avoiding the hottest times of the day? So we're having these conversations to hopefully be able to implement them soon into the future. Another project we're working on is called the Business Function Mapping Project. And we, again, here are working with different business functions throughout the organization. So the 4 listed here are Watershed Management team, our water treatment team, our water distribution team, which manages distribution both in our collection system and service area, and then our finance team. And this summer we'll be holding a 2-day tabletop exercise together with all of these teams in the same virtual room, and talking about, going through, again, different climate science scenarios with them and getting their perspective on what the different impacts to their business functions can be from climate change. And then co-developing, co-producing adaptation solutions that we can implement together as an organization. And our climate adaptation team, we really see ourselves as being able to provide the climate science to the organization, but we're not experts in finance or distribution or treatment, and we need and value their perspective to tell us how potential climate change scenarios could impact them, and then to come up with solutions that we can implement together. We have a really progressive and proactive watershed management program at Denver Water. So we have, we're partners with the Forest Service in a program called the From Forest to Faucets program. And this program is designed to reduce the probability of high intensity, high impact wildfires in areas that are critical to our watersheds for our water supply purposes. So what you see here is a picture, a zoomed out picture of Dillon Reservoir, and you see a lot of beetle kill pine there. In this program, identified this as a critical area. It would not be good for this to burn because it's right by Dillon Reservoir, which is a water supply reservoir. So we actively remove this beetle kill pine, which you'll see in the next picture that comes up here. Again, going back. So we do these active forest treatments, and you can see those piles of dead debris there, which I believe then get burned in the winter. And this program is designed to prevent these high intensity wildfires, which lead to things like this. So this happened in 1996 after the Buffalo Creek fire. And not long after the fire, there was a 2-inch rainstorm that came and washed all of this debris into our Strontia Springs Reservoir. And this is a serious danger for our system. This can really shut down the operations of a reservoir and put water delivery in jeopardy. And that's really our highest priority, to be able to deliver high quality, safe drinking water to our customers at all times. So we're trying to prevent future events like this from happening. Another thing Denver Water's done, which I think is really neat, is help to build the field of climate adaptation, both locally, nationally, and even internationally. And all the credit here goes to Larna Cates, who again is my supervisor and runs our climate change adaptation program. So all these things here are things that Denver Water has contributed to, either with intellectual contributions or funding contributions, or both. So going through the things here, the State of the Science Report, which was released in April of this year, which is, as far as I know, the most comprehensive science report on the Colorado River. The Water Utility Climate Alliance was founded in 2008, co-founded by Denver Water, and it's a collection of water utilities from around the country that work together to plan for climate change adaptation. The Climate Change in Colorado report was released in 2014. Denver Water recently released with the Water Research Foundation the Water Utility Business Risk and Opportunity Framework that focuses on climate change adaptation. And then Denver Water made contributions both to the 3rd and 4th National Climate Assessment. So some really neat work that's progressed the field and really brought it to the place that it is today. And the final thing to leave you with here is another project that Denver Water's been working on together with the Water Utility Climate Alliance, which is called the Leading Practices Project. And what this project does is it highlights the current leading practices in climate adaptation at water supply utilities. And that can be expanded beyond water supply utilities as well. And it really groups all leading practices in these 5 major categories. And I'll go through some examples for each category for Denver Water. So in terms of sustaining climate change adaptation actions at an organization, we really think it's essential to have climate adaptation and sustainability staff at your organization, and to have formal programs and budgets that support these staffs, as well as to have language in your organization's strategic plan that supports the work of climate adaptation. And then to engage the organization. So as I mentioned, we see ourselves as, in order to make progress as an organization, we need the help of basically everyone else in the organization. So it's our job to recognize leaders in climate adaptation and the many business functions throughout Denver Water, and to provide them with effective messaging that they can pass on to people they work with, and to really get that ripple effect of mainstreaming climate change adaptation throughout your organization. And we work directly with our public affairs team to develop that effective messaging. Of course, it's important to understand the system you're working with. So doing, detailed hydrologic modeling and integrating climate change into that hydrologic modeling. Some projects I mentioned, like understanding the heat impacts to staff and assets in the business function mapping project. And then also projects like the Colorado River System Conservation Pilot Program. We take a lot of pride in the way we plan at Denver Water. We're always thinking very far into the future, and we sort of take the approach of plan, implement. And so, as I mentioned, we use the scenario planning process. And another side from the scenario planning is when things really went into stay-at-home orders with COVID-19, Denver Water immediately created a scenario planning task force where they looked at different COVID-19 scenarios and how those can impact Denver Water. So having that capacity on board was really helpful, and really gave our management team an idea of what to plan for. So our integrated resource plan that informs all these other plans listed here, including our enterprise risk management plan, which takes a detailed look at all risks to the organization. In terms of implementing things, so we're always looking to develop diverse and strategic water reserves to maintain that reliable supply. We have our From Forest to Faucets program, as I mentioned, our Gross Reservoir Expansion Project, which is looking to add geographic diversity to our water supply. The North Water Treatment Plant is that plant that I mentioned that we're building as a scalable, went from 240 MGD to 75 MGD. The Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, which is a cooperative agreement between Denver Water and entities on the West Slope to really work together moving forward into the future. And then the WISE partnership, which you recently heard about, and our increase in our fixed rate structure, which I detailed, that provides a more reliable, more steady revenue stream, which is helpful for an uncertain future when we're expecting weather to be more variable. Some final reflections here. So, climate change is one of many challenges that a water utility faces. And it's not often, quote unquote, the fire of the day that needs to be put out. But it's important to really keep it on everyone's mind. And, it's like everything can be put in terms of COVID these days, but, it's like, if we would have planned a lot more a few years ago for a pandemic, we'd probably be in a better place than we are now. And so, similar type thing with climate change. If we plan now, we'll be in a much better place in the future, and we don't want it to blindside us. In addressing climate change really means embracing uncertainty, because we don't know what the future will look like, but it will be different from today. And there is no one size fits all way to preparedness. And for next steps, we're always continuously seeking actionable information from the climate science community and really working to maintain the momentum that's been built over the last 10 or so years. We're currently working on a project that's diving into how extreme weather events might come to fruition under climate change in Colorado. And then we'll soon be doing a climate review of our internal risk register, which again looks at all the risks to our organization. And then we're always having ongoing conversations with our peers, and we find it really important to be connected into the broader science and adaptation communities. So we're always reaching out when we can. With that, thank you, and feel free to get in touch if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Taylor. That was awesome. We'll open it up for questions again, and Max did tell me that Lorna is actually here with us, so if you have other things you want to add, please feel free, Lorna.
Thank you. No, I think Taylor covered it pretty effectively.
I guess I wrote down one question. Taylor, you talked a lot about like preparing for the future. Are you guys making any efforts to like do any work to mitigate the damage, not the damage, but like the impacts that climate change could have just as a whole, like so that our extremes aren't necessarily so high, like efforts just to change what you guys are doing currently to be more sustainable, or are you guys making any efforts like that?
Yeah, good question. So we have as well an internal sustainability team at Denver Water that has really worked to reduce our energy use, our waste consumption, and Denver Water's own water use. And so a lot of what they've done is something that's really important as a first step is just cataloging and understanding the energy we use. So we work with the name is escaping me, but it's the organization where you register your annual carbon emissions. So we've been able to, register that, and we have goals for reducing our carbon emissions. And I think we've already been able to hit those goals. So we're looking to develop our next set of goals.
Awesome, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions?